I'm the chair. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we have enough. Okay. I now call the Thursday, May 28, 2026 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting in order. The third item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anybody from the public that wishes to speak?
No, Chair, we do not.
Okay, that being said, we'll close the public comment period. We'll move on to agenda item 4, minutes, consideration of and action on the approval of the minutes of the May 14th, 2026 meeting.
Motion to approve?
Oh, I have a comment. On the number 8 adjournment, it says a motion to adjourn at 6:55 p.m. was made by Chuck Brown and seconded by Sapana Patel. The motion passed, but it shows that Timothy Hart was one of the ayes, and I was not present to vote. I had recused myself and left the room, so just for clarification. So I'll make a motion to approve with the amendment that my name is stricken from the ayes. Do I have a second? All in favor? Oh, there we go. Hand vote? Oh, wait, by hand again. Motion to approve. Approved unanimously. Thank you. Move on to agenda item 5, workshop, Development Code Diagnostic and Analysis, a review and discussion of the Development Code Diagnostic and Analysis. Ms. Rodriguez is going to present to us this evening.
I will.
Okay,
Good evening, commissioners. I will be here part of the presentation for the workshop, as well as our consultants that we have with Simple City. With that, I'd like to introduce our Simple City consultants. Matt Lewis is here today, as well as Elizabeth Esposito. Tonight, we're going to go over the background on how we got here, an overview of the diagnostic and analysis, which is mainly going to touch on our parking and zoning regulations, as well as some other items, next steps, and then some discussion and feedback from you. I will say, though, that at any time during this workshop presentation, if you have a question, please ask that question. You don't need to wait till the end to ask those questions of us, but we do have that opportunity then. This is a first step in a two-step of the development code review through the lens of redevelopment. This is the development code analysis that is looking at our regulations through a lens of redevelopment and as well as infill development. The next step is going to be adopting some parking regulations in the development code, and this does support this fostering sensitive redevelopment as part of the strategic action plan that we have. Listening sessions were held on September 22nd of last year. It involved the community leaders, the development community, city staff, and you, the planning and zoning commissioners. Since that time, staff has been working with Simple City to develop the diagnosis and analysis based off of those listening sessions, as well as staff feedback. The expectations tonight is to cover those outcomes with you and then seek feedback with our zoning and our parking code amendments. With that, I am going to hand it over to Simple City, and they are going to give you the rest of that presentation. This is Matt Lewis.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Matt Lewis with Simple City Design. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. And we'll be walking through the code diagnosis background. When we started this project, we started looking at your existing built patterns, your natural environment, and just an analysis both digitally and physically looking at the patterns which make up your community. And it's a series of residential neighborhoods wrapped in commercial corridors, often strip center, parking lots along the frontage, really large roadways that interconnect the community through a series of networks. And during the time that you all built out, let me see how I fast forward this. Oh, there we go, thanks. You all had made many efforts into phasing Sugar Land for its next life cycle, planning for the strategic elements from a budgetary standpoint, from a zoning perspective, and you've been managing a lot of redevelopment throughout the community. When you look at it in a myopic view, there are a lot of infill or bypass lots that are still available within these areas. But you all have been setting the stage for your next life cycle and setting up strategic initiatives. Initially, what we wanted to do is meet with the community members that to gather some insight of what's working, what's not working, and why. And what you get right, what you get wrong, and why. And that analysis, several of y'all commissioners were at the listening sessions back in September as well, so we're really excited to be in front of you all today to start advancing this effort. It's taken a while to get to this point, and we believe that there's real opportunities for modifications of your existing ordinances, to update your standards, to support new housing types and diverse housing and livability trends that are happening throughout the region. And so we met with community builders who shared, places that people like to gather and hang out, places that are having problems with parking, and we heard all of these really intricate pieces and how they assemble together through your built environment. With that, we started the Sugar Land code diagnosis, and what we discovered is you're getting exactly what you're asking for. The development standards on the books are yielding the developments that you're achieving, and it sounds like Sugar Land really is ready for some additional housing types. We also noticed, during this analysis that there's a declining population slightly. There's a lot of moving components, but it's something to be mindful of, particularly as housing trends shift and people are working remotely. Post-COVID, retail and the way that people live and experience life changed pretty dramatically. And some of the people, seek different lifestyle choices after, COVID, and, providing those opportunities for a community is really important to maintain the community so that you can start off as an empty nester, just out of college, you buy your first home, you raise your kids, go on to the next life cycle where they're out of the house, you're back to empty nesters. That full life cycle and being able to stay in one place is really important for people. That's where they build community. It's how community gets supported. And it's really an opportunity for you all here in Sugar Land as well. But the general consensus was that the ordinances that govern Sugar Land up to this point have served it well, and it's built out in this kind of pattern. When we started doing the analysis, though, in order to build smaller housing types or cottage courts or even townhomes, if you weren't in a PD, your numerical values make it almost impossible because of the massive lot size that you have to buy in order to accomplish those housing topologies. And so if it wasn't within a PD, the amount of brain damage that it takes and the amount of value that you'd have to invest to make it work doesn't work out. And so we think it's a real opportunity for some additional standards to make that work. Furthermore, one of the things that we were noticing is your commercial corridors have a lot of parking, and they're along their frontages, often even turning their backs to the waterways. And so if you think about as the areas retrofit, there's opportunities even to re-engage with the waterways and leave commercial alleys and service zones in between this, readapting into the parking lots. While this may be a 50-year life cycle, putting the tools in place to enable this would be really critical. It may be much shorter than this. If the population continues to move, Texas continues to grow at this rapid rate that we're receiving an influx of population from all over the country, we don't know what holds, the next stage, but being able and ready for those development trends as they shift is really critical, and getting those policies on the books to support that would allow for rapid reinvestment back into Sugar Land where these gaps exist. This is the clearest microphone. And so in order to do that, we, just a quick synopsis, broke it into 3 categories, if you will. There's barriers to development, which are parking and stormwater. Sometimes your parking standards alongside your minimum lot standards, along with your building envelope, along with your stormwater management criteria, means you have to buy a much larger land area than what's necessary for the building that you're going to be building, or the actual product that you'll be building into those standards. There are communities throughout the country that are completely doing away with parking. Parking has been more of an art than a science. The great Donald Shoup wrote the book on the high cost of free parking. Parking expert from UCLA says that all parking standards are make-believe, and they got borrowed from a city next door, and they got borrowed from some other city next door. And when we started to analyze that, we thought there were real opportunities with this. We'll get into that shortly. Some of the other elements we feel like can just be simplified. Your ordinances are pretty dense and heady, and it requires a lot of analysis to do some basic things. We also believe that your non-conforming ordinances have a lot of potential to actually establish standards for non-conforming sites, non-conforming uses, and non-conforming structures, rather than just blanket non-conformities, because you have non-conformities throughout your community based off of the standards at which they were developed at those times. Some of your greatest examples are in the Hill District, which, if you look at your standard subdivision regulations, oftentimes those houses, based on setbacks, lot proximity to the street, and the building envelopes, don't meet your minimum lot sizes, even for your own town. So, but it's a great example of a wonderful neighborhood, first community that was basically part of the Imperial Sugar company town, if you will. The code organization, just making it easier to read. We could dwell on that for a bit, but land use regulations. Some of your land use matrix gets hyper detailed, differentiating between a bank and a credit union, and even though you've got them broken out from a land use category, all of the standards within them are the same. So they are artificially broken out. You can just consolidate them, make it a lot easier to read. Your sign standards, there's a lot of graphics in there, but it's a series of math equations to calculate the allowable square footage, and how do you calculate out the negative space. It's an extremely complicated process when signage should be a very easy type of thing. However, I'm sure the city attorney is going to note that signage is one of the most federally regulated and stringent things, and you cannot have inconsistencies in the application of signage. So the way that it gets interpreted is extremely important to avoid problematic issues. Next is options for infill or redevelopment. We're going to make a recommendation that there's 3 zoning districts needed to really support this, and it's possible to modify some of your existing standards to just create a little more flexibility. Instead of having fixed numerical values, just adding ranges in there could create a lot of allowances where maybe there's a tree that exists that you don't want to cut down, but the zoning code says that it's got to be a fixed 25 feet, having between 5 and 25 feet, having ranges where the building can move around on the lots rather than having boxes within boxes within boxes that sometimes are really arbitrary and capricious. That would be a really great way to right size some of your standards. And so that's another topic that we'll get into. So we write development codes for a living. My previous life, I was a public servant. I was the director of development services for the fastest growing cities in the country from 2004 to 2015, 16. And I started Simple City to help communities figure out what ordinances are working, figure out how do we create local preferences, building your ordinances around what the community really aspires to accomplish. And we think that it's really important that the ordinances support those values, and it doesn't make the developers go through a guessing game of what you're trying to accomplish, but rather it points it out in a clear and logical manner. 2 side-by-side ordinances. The ordinance that you see that's blue, that's the urban center, is how we generally write our ordinances. You can do 90% of your development just based off of this one sheet. We create a series of tables that really allow this. When we started looking through your mixed-use conservation district, MUC, your codes are amok. We really believe that there's opportunity to clean these up. Even if you just read that language from the start, it's very convoluted in order to assemble what you're trying to get out of it. And providing clarity and direct goals within your zoning development standards really can help support this. So I'm going pretty fast. If you have any commissional conversations you'd like to start, I'm more than willing to do that at this point if you like, or I can continue to proceed as well. So what we have worked with the staff about, we're bringing just 2 key topics from the series of recommendations for the commission to focus on. The first topic is parking. We heard throughout the listening sessions that parking's misaligned with today's uses, and furthermore, the uses come and go. We used to write development standards around blockbusters, movie stores, and that's come and gone. Then you had red boxes popped everywhere, and we started writing development regulations around red boxes. So land uses are not fixed things, and people are very creative, and we're going to continue to see modifications, and your ordinances must update that and to stay current with trends and make sure that your built environment's actually emulating where the trends are shifting. Shifting parking patterns means that some of these lots are overutilized and some are underutilized. And that's a complex thing. Parking, again, is more of an art than a science, and the way that people use the spaces change. And so instead of building your built environment around the end user that's in the building, thinking about building the built environment to be a timeless place. The place we're in right now, this town center, is really flexible. For example, the ground floor spaces can hold a dress shop to a hair salon to, cafe, coffee shops. Who knows what next use is? And their spaces are broken down so that they're bite-sized, if you will. If you can have a little bit of money, get a little bit of space, build a little bit of business, generate a little bit of wealth, and it's very flexible and adaptable. Some of the places, based off of your minimum standards, require big, takedowns, large buildings, large parking, a lot of infrastructure. It's extremely costly. And it's, furthermore, privatizing, and mandating private lots be deemed for parking could be outside the city's wheelhouse, particularly when you really understand that parking is generally required by the financing institute, the end users. For example, if a Target comes in, they have their very stringent minimum standards they're going to want. If a Chewy's restaurant comes in, they have very minimum standards. Regardless of what the city has in their ordinances, they're going to build their parking exactly as they see fit. And so I'm challenging and opening the dialogue up to, is the parking regulations within the city's wheelhouse, and are we requiring, buildable and taxable valued land to be facilitating parking? We've been, here several times, but today we're really analyzing walking the city, and I'm going to say some of y'all's parked cars have some of the most beautiful views, and there's opportunity lost there. And so yes, sir.
Let me just to clarify, are you saying you want us to eliminate any parking requirements in a city?
Tossing it out there. Yes, sir. The staff told me to be bold. I wanted to bring some.
I read part of that, but it didn't say totally. But it sounds like from this, you're saying you want to totally eliminate any requirements. That's your recommendation.
It's one of the recommendations. We wanted to have that conversation, and I think it's a fun place to start at. Oftentimes when we write ordinances, we never talk to the community about parking. And at the end, they realize that we never discuss parking, and then they recognize parking is not the critical component. It's a tertiary issue to what could be. And when you're assembling a built environment, parking is going to be present just like dumpsters. You're required. It's one of those development standards that's going to be present, and it will be but we don't specify where the dumpsters go. And so just thinking about the idea that parking could be market driven. And if there's existing parking next to a new building coming in, and they handshake and they work on their parking and they work it out amongst themselves, and you get more taxable value by a larger built building or parks or playgrounds or stormwater quality. There are so many other elements that could be utilized than just regulating parking. But I'd love to facilitate the dialogue around parking. This is one of our key topics, and we knew it may take a while. And when we were going through your parking, standards, you can see that professional office neighborhood, professional office regional, same standards, and really it's I don't know how you all came up with this. I'd love to hear any explanation of where these standards came to be. And then we go on to bars. Now we're requiring drinking and driving. I mean, you're requiring per seat, every 50 feet in a bar, we require a parking space. Every 50 foot of a
50
bar.
square feet.
I'm sorry.
50 square feet.
Yeah, every 50 square feet. Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
It requires one, yeah. And so just, real conversation. It's something that's required, and, how does that fit?
I think to your point, a lot of this was done because they did it over there, or we've always done it this way. And it gets edified into code, and then it lives there forever. And I think we have to look around at what's going on in the world, how people are commuting differently, how people are living differently. And to your point, to revitalize what we want in Sugar Land is going to require us to take the blinders off of we've always done it this way and look at what the opportunities are. That's my 2 cents.
And when we did this analysis, we looked all over your community, and I looked for the most full parking lot, and this was it. This is the Walmart parking lot. If you look on Google Earth at your community, there's surface parking lots.
I saw you had right sizing in there. That I'm
Yes, sir.
much more in favor of something that says right sizing than the law of unintended consequences. We're going to throw out an experiment of losing parking and what happens, and then we'll react after that. Incremental change instead of drastic.
But isn't your point?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. If you're saying to totally eliminate all parking requirements.
But it wasn't going to get there yet. But yes, sir. It was a
But I think the point of what you're trying to say is rather than having in code that says 1 per 250, whatever your formulaic is letting your tenant drive that in the discussion with the city versus if Walmart, say, was to come into Sugar Land today, we'd go to page whatever it is, and we would look and there's the parking count. Yes, what we're trying to say is, let's see what Walmart really needs now. And maybe they don't need that same count, right? That's kind of where this is headed.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct. And Walmart is doing retrofits of their own centers, like removing their parking and going vertical in their large parking lots. That's going on in Garland, Texas. I believe there's another one in Dallas and one down in this area as well. Furthermore, parking directly correlates to household income needed to support rent rates or to purchase, because your land area directly is correlated, your minimum lot size based on your parking counts. And so we believe that there's a real opportunity to evaluate this from a series of steps. There are several communities throughout the country that have completely done away with parking. There are no Austin, Texas. There's Bastrop, Texas, Bandera, Taylor, Texas.
Let me clarify that. When you say completely eliminated parking, or do you mean transfer the requirement to determine the parking to the property owner? Meaning you're not letting development go on without parking. You're saying it's up to Target to determine how much parking they need. You just don't want it codified as an ordinance.
There are communities that do not regulate parking. It is not part of their review process. So, that would be what some communities have gone that far. And so what we call it is market-driven parking. And the market's going to determine whether the parking would be needed, regulated, or required. But the city is not mandating parking. Again, that's the extreme. No, I'm sensing hesitation there. We don't need to go there. So here, we'll get us into the parking options. Parking option 1 was, market-driven parking. It's proven to be an effective method for other cities. It may not be correct for Sugar Land right now. So the second one would be site-specific parking. Reduce standards based off a set of metrics This needs to be a geographic information, GIS exercise, and you can really start to isolate areas that are either overparked or underparked, and start to right-size those areas. So you would do it more of a district scale, and you can start to create some interconnectivity and shared parking opportunities amongst the existing built environment in those areas. We believe that's a very logical, reasonable approach that could help mitigate new developments coming in and being required to provide parking. It may even open up the opportunity for some infill development in parking lots where they don't have to have these certain minimum standards anymore, where you could actually start seeing buildings be retrofitted in parking lots and start to get new development in that context as well. So that was option number 2. And then that's the geographic approach is what we call it. And then option 3 would be right-sizing your existing standards, possibly even putting parking maximums in there. There are several communities throughout the country. They started instilling parking maximums to ensure that the built environment actually penciled. So it was financially viable for the developers and it was financially successful for the community, so that the built environment was utilizing both, you think about all of the infrastructure you're providing. Water lines, wastewater lines, electric utilities run past all of these parking lots with no built environment, no taps, no connection, no wealth generation, if you will, along those areas. So if you think of it in those terms as well, it's another idea of just, creating financial, solvent solutions for the community from a financial standpoint, making sure that you're leveraging your existing infrastructure and utility to support infill and adaptive reuse development.
I understand what you're saying, but do you have an example of a city that did away with parking requirement and failed?
And failed?
Yes.
There's not been a city that has limited them and failed that we've discovered. No,
That
ma'am.
you have discovered, right?
Sure.
But
And
doesn't
that's
mean it doesn't exist.
And I don't know anyone that's gone back and put them on the books after the fact. So I don't know what failure is either yet.
I guess what's the sample size of that you know that have abandoned the parking regulations besides Bastrop and Austin?
Taylor, Texas, and there are communities across the country that have done it. Austin, there's several. Round Rock, I think, is working on removing them. So there are communities, of this size that are modifying parking regulations and removing them as complete.
Sugar Land is dependent on, using their cars. I think we'd get a lot of pushback from residents if we completely eliminated parking.
But when you say eliminate all regulations, you mean the city would have no say, like in Austin, they have no say when a new development comes in as to what that parking is going to look like?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. They don't regulate the number of parking spaces. They can regulate where it goes, how it interfaces with their public realm, the placement, but there are no minimum parking standards for any uses.
So if somebody wanted to put a restaurant in and they basically took up the whole lot, they left, maybe 20 parking spaces, and then they expected the rest of the people to park on the side streets and in the residential areas, if it was close to a residential area, they allow that?
Yes, ma'am, that'd be allowed.
And they don't get any pushback from the residents? I mean, is it considered a success because people park there, or have they really gotten feedback from the community that says, hey, we don't really like people parking in our communities? Going to this restaurant.
That example right there is Houston, because what they allow is, okay, you can build a restaurant on a small lot, 5,000 square feet. You don't need to provide parking at that lot as long as you can say that you have a parking within 300 feet of this or 500 feet of that. And then they have also allowed where you can, handshake, like you mentioned, with a neighboring lot and say, okay, I would take your parking in the evening hours, you need your parking for office purposes in the morning hours. That's there. But there's also a fourth method where they actually allow valet parking. So valet service have come up, and they go and they buy these outlots, and then they're standing there and you have to pay them $20 to go to that restaurant because they take your car and they bring it back. That's what Austin did. When you go to Austin and you go down that Caesar Road and all the restaurants, you have to actually turn your car into a valet service or go to a public parking in the tower structure and then walk back to the restaurant. So there are examples within a few hundred miles of City of Sugar Land where things are not working out. So now you have all these restaurants popping up in Houston because they can. But what is a spill-off? You park on the streets in front of someone else's home, all the way down the street, or you have to do valet parking because the property itself is not providing any parking.
To your point, and I respect what you're saying, I've negotiated hundreds of leases the last 40 years of my career. The first thing we look at is parking, period, end of story. So does Target, so does Walmart, so does the grocery store. That's a big deal. I understand your spillover theory, but I think what he's trying to, or what I read into this was simply, we're trying to look at this differently because the world has changed since 1975 and Sugar Land was built. How do you look at parking from a different perspective? That's all.
Why not let developers request through a process reduction in parking instead of saying we don't have any requirements anymore?
I mean, that's another increase to barrier. And so anytime they've got to come for a public consultation and there's an unknown, they're not going to opt to do that. They're going to just build the parking out and you're going to get additional parking that could have been buildable area. That's often what happens. They don't want to seek brain damage. They want certainty, and they don't want to come up and ask for questions. They'd like to just get their process through. And so
No, I mean, to Chuck's point, seasoned developers will look out for their best interests because, you will not develop an apartment complex unless you have parking for each unit, right? Because you run out of parking, where are the people going to go? And that has happened in California, where they are actually developing and you don't have parking on site, so now you have to pay for that spot extra, or you have to, go and lease a spot in a public garage or a garage that is over a bank or something, and then walk back 3 blocks to your place. And then there are cities actually where they did away with parking, and the spill-off is so bad. You just you barely have a lane to pass through because cars are parked on either side, and developers will do what developers want to do. And those are just, startup developers, and they will maximize the land because they're paying for it. Yep. So I think it's good to, take off your blinders and find a solution, but definitely have reduction or a process to seek reduction. Yes, retailers are not, everybody's not running to Walmart to buy everything because you can order online. So there's probably a 30% populace out there that is still using Walmart if they're not using their online version, or Amazon or one of the other restaurants, same thing. Everybody's using Uber and DoorDash, and tomorrow we'll have, AI version of Uber and DoorDash, and we won't need to go into restaurants as much, but.
And then you have a whole bunch of abundance of parking.
But I'll push back on that a little bit, is that you can't foresee the future like we didn't see the future of COVID. So you don't know what's going to be out there. So you make a structure or a plan for a 30-year plan, the life cycle, and you live with it. I mean, we can't. Plus, you have to serve the needs of the current community. It's a delicate balance, yes, between serving the taxpayers of today and the residents of tomorrow. So, I mean, it's a very difficult balance. That's why I said incremental instead of drastic. Yeah. If you incrementally change it, you can track it, you can trend it, and you can change it as you move along. If you drastically change it, now it's hard to go back. Nobody repeals taxes. So it's a very difficult road to hoe in that respect, especially since one thing, and I hesitate to comment on this, but I saw that you had 4 interest groups comment on this, and it was 4 of the esoteric groups, the people that are most knowing on the verbiage that you're including, but there's no public comment yet on these at all. So we have no idea what the public input is on any of these changes, and they're so drastic in some respects that's why I think it's good to have this discussion.
Yeah, I'm all for reduction. I mean, I think that, that's something we've, had on the docket for a long time around, how do you do this? But I also don't think that the city should allow the developers to be in the driver's seat for how they want to put their development together. I mean, I think that's something that Sugar Land's been very strong. I mean, while it puts some barriers in, and I think we have to look at how we minimize those barriers. I mean, we've been talking about that since I've been in P&Z. But I don't think you can, just throw the keys and say, well, you go and figure out what parking you need, and whatever it is will be great. Because at the end of the day, the city is going to pay for that, just like we were just now talking about that, then you end up with a problem, and then the city's got to figure out, okay, how are we going to solve that problem? Because you got a lot of unhappy people.
Can I try and solve it for you real quick? Your roadways are so wide. If this truly became a problem and just magically all of your parking lots are full and you're getting overflow on your streets, you all have the ability to, your lanes are 16 feet wide.
Which ones, on Highway 6?
I just mean throughout the community. Your connector roads throughout the community.
Have you driven on this community during rush hour?
Yes, sir. I have. And
I'm not talking about in the residential
and everyone
areas.
races from red light to red light. And that's because of the street designs.
Some of the major areas that we have that are not developed yet, I can see Walmart and all the big box stores, the movie theaters, but what we have left, I can't see Walmart and those kind of stores coming. It's gonna be something completely different, and I would not be for eliminating parking.
Sure. That's good. We can squash this conversation. I
Well,
understand.
I have one question I want to ask, and this is probably an umbrella question that will affect not only parking, but the other pieces of what you put together here today. If I'm a developer and I'm looking at a city of Sugar Land, which by all intents and purposes, when you compare it to the city of Houston, is a much smaller footprint, correct? And it's got Missouri City next to it, it's got Stafford next to it, it's got Richmond next to it, and all these other deals. When you've looked at what you've dealt with in the past and with your experience, if you've got ABC store that says, okay, we want to be in this part of this area, and they say, and what we're looking at right now is this is redevelopment code, right? This is us recognizing this is a city. We want to redevelop some things because as you mentioned, population's going backwards. We've got aging centers. We've got all those things that are part of the life cycle. So you've got these companies that come in and they're looking at, I can go to Sugar Land and it's got all these things I got to adhere to, or I can go to Richmond and they're going to be much more talkative to me. What's your experience with that? Are you seeing companies that are making a move and getting away from the stringent requirements, or are you seeing companies that are adapting to more rigid code environments?
I think it's yes and. Some market forces are going to yield and say, well, this is my spot, regardless of the difficulties in the administration, they're going to locate here. So I really believe that's hyper local. But to build on that, I think that, having your tools in place of what you're emulating and what you would like to see is really critical to set that up for success, so that when they do arrive, it's yes, you're welcome, and here's where you go, and here's your standards that you're going to be adhering to, rather than, no, you can't do that, guess at what we want, no, you're wrong, go back to the drawing board, resubmit, guess at what you want. And your ordinances kind of can lead to that. Sugar Land was built out through a series of developers making the decisions of your street network. It wasn't done by a city plan. Many communities had a large city plan. They created a thoroughfare master plan network. They created street networks, that lot and block patterns. Sugar Land, based on the time period that it grew up, it didn't follow those patterns. And so it grew up by a series of subdivision plats at a time and zoning cases at a time. And that's the infrastructure that you all received at the end of this. It's extremely costly infrastructure. I think that it's something to be mindful of. Y'all's recommendation on not removing parking minimums is crystal clear. Do these other two options seem like logical approaches? Looking at it geographically, doing an analysis of existing parking facilities, land uses, and time zones, with right sizing, or is it more appropriate just looking at different zoning classifications, get back into your land use matrix, modify your land use matrix to be more adaptable, I guess, based off of new trends?
Have you seen anything, like a traffic study done except for parking? So you have a traffic analysis, how much consumerism really goes there. I've never seen one, that's why I'm asking. I've seen plenty of traffic analysis, but no parking analysis outside of we meet the code, we're done. Is that something that you could suggest when you say right sizing? So dependent upon, I know it's on square footage, but do we just need more granularity in the types of businesses and how many parking spaces they would have to have? Would that
Yes,
help
sir.
right size?
Yes, sir, that's it.
Okay.
You go back in and start to reanalyze the ratios and the square footages and see if you can make it more flexible. And again, the market's going to know whether it can absorb that, and if it's in the area that's going to be supportive of that as well. So that would be one way of doing it, yes, sir.
Have you looked at anything in the Houston area around the Montrose, Washington area, where they have lots of small venues and no parking? And about every weekend, there's a list of, I don't know, a few dozen people that get their cars towed because they didn't park exactly where they were supposed to, or they couldn't find any parking. Have you considered looking at that area? Because I know that that particular area has like almost no rules on parking.
Yes, sir.
And there's nothing but frustrated people down there at the end of the evening when their car is not where they left it.
I think that
That's me.
the interesting thing is
I
it's-
personally don't want to see that with no regulations at all in Sugar Land, where you come out to find your car is at an impound lot someplace else. I would be good with the no parking kind of rules, as long as with the no parking kind of rules, there was no towing rules also during those hours. So that, that you could be, the owner of that parking spot could be mad at you, but couldn't make you take your car and, add $500 towing expenses for you going to a restaurant that had no parking. And the neighbors decided that they wanted their parking just for their constituents, not the next door neighbor's constituents. That's the problem I see with what the no parking problem, or having no parking designated spots.
And that area is wildly successful. It has some of the highest value per acre of all of Houston. And daily, people are flocking there for those little house form commercials because they're seeking something fun to do. It does not seem like parking is a deterrent in the least. That place is wildly successful. I mean, and I would hope that'd be a lovely problem to have, where you've got this level of community support and people are traveling. The problem there is people are driving from all over Houston to experience those little places because there's not anywhere else in Houston that provides that level of richness or organic, type of environment. So people flock there, willing to walk a few blocks to accomplish that.
But have you been there? There are
Yes, ma'am.
actually
I grew up in
blocks.
that area.
There are actually high rises there that just are dedicated for parking. So they created those spaces, but there are actually buildings, garages just for parking. And then yes, you do have to walk 2-3 blocks to get to your destination. So they didn't do away with parking. They did away with parking lots. So, the buildings have smaller setbacks. They are allowed to come closer. There's a ordinance, I think, that allows you to come closer to the street, and you can have
Patios and outdoor.
yeah, you can have patios and you can have smaller setbacks if you do this, this, and this. And parking hasn't been taken away. City of Houston has not taken parking away.
Yes, ma'am.
It's still there. They've just revisited and reduced it a little bit. And if you wanted to study a city that has done away with parking on a large scale, that would be Nashville. Nashville, Tennessee, in the downtown area, where they have 16, 17 high-rises coming up. They're sitting on limestone, solid bedrock, and there's no parking requirement. So how are these 34, 60-story buildings coming up, office towers, condos, apartments? Where is the parking? Parking is underground. They're having to cut the limestone to inject the parking because the land is so expensive.
Yes, ma'am. I mean,
Well, I
and again,
hope we don't
different
come to
communities
that.
have different desires, different needs. We just wanted, I felt I would be remiss if we didn't put this on the table. It's happening across the country, and obviously it's not right for Sugar Land. We can move on from that conversation. Do the right sizing standards, does that make more logical sense? I think you all have enough parking for a 5,000-year parking event, and you still would have empty spaces. But just from a land use and a financial standpoint, we look at it, and it is severely overparked. Your community is severely
Right
overparked.
sizing, I think, is the way to go. Minimizing it, setting some minimum standards, sure. I do think that you should talk to community, business owners.
Yes, ma'am.
See what, if their foot traffic has decreased and they don't need that concrete to just be sitting out there, then they can put it to a different use, lease it, sell it, whatever.
That's exactly the point. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
And you should go to Kroger, not, I don't know what parking lot you showed.
That was
But
Walmart.
Kroger is full, especially on Mother's Day. Kroger is busting, so yeah.
All right, thank you, sir. All right. So the right sizing is our direction.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Shared parking was another option. And then also, when this is an idea that several communities have adopted in their codes, is when parking garages do get built, creating future-proof parking. So instead of having slanted ramps and making it to where the floors can't retrofit, you actually create flat surface areas so that actually could be adapted later for, even at the ground floor, you would require 25 or 14-foot ceiling heights so that you could come back and retrofit those parking garages to make them buildable spaces in the future. Some communities are adding those standards in their codes so that they didn't get parking garages that just have to be completely demolished at the time that use is no longer a valid use. Just an option, wanted to toss it out there. And then utilizing on-street parking in some districts where, again, you could actually meter some areas. That may not be the right thing for Sugar Land right now either, just based off of the current trends, but again, wanted to just point those out. We will go back and right-size parking and work with the staff on what that looks like. Next, we were going to talk about zoning options, and the layered development standards sometimes arbitrarily limit developable and taxable value that could be added on your tax rolls. We feel like this is really important, particularly with y'all's life cycle of infrastructure coming up. Infrastructure usually has a 35 to 50-year life cycle before redevelopment starts happening, and being able to pay for those and make sure that they have adequate financial returns on investment is critical from the land use perspective as well. So in order to do that, we've looked at how do you achieve different housing diversity, better leveraging some of your infill development, even, again, retrofitting and into certain areas as well. We've looked at both mapping these districts or just putting the districts on the books where you're not applying them. They just get written into your development standards, so someone would have to come apply for this zoning classification. So the classifications would be within your development standards, but you're not applying it on the map. Does that make sense? We're not seeking to rezone a bunch of properties to these districts unless the commission and the council felt that would be appropriate, but rather just get the districts in the books and allow for people to request zoning to these new districts. We've come up with 3 potential districts. The urban center district, which is basically this. It would really emulate the form of the buildings to be brought to the street edge. The parking would go in the rear. You could be allowed to go, vertical, so vertical mixed use, residential over retail, office over retail, or even have residential ground floor as well. So you don't have to regulate the individual uses, but again, you're starting to assemble the form of the buildings so that they can retrofit easily like downtowns. The other idea within this center would be allowing really small lot sizes. So we could achieve, the Montrose style area. Maybe we build parking garage behind it, but you could achieve that level of house form commercial. You have it down Boone Street. It's a really beautiful street. It's a wide street, but you've got a series of house form office and commercial uses And they're parking on street. I saw several like on street, and it didn't look like it was detrimental. It looked like it still facilitated moving of traffic, and you could tell which businesses were hopping, which ones were not. Just was an interesting case study right here in Sugar Land. So that would be more of a transition zone type of district, which we'll get into. The other one is neighborhood zone. This would be your missing middle housing classification, where townhomes, row houses, duplexes, triplexes could be potentially allowed, fourplexes, mansion homes, if you will. It looks like a mansion from the outside, but it's 4 units on the inside. And again, writing the development standards to emulate that so that it looks like a house form, but it functions, like a fourplex, and they could be condoed, so it could be 4 cell units as well. So that's a possibility.
So, question for you. How does this work in conjunction with existing subdivisions? Have you studied on how much of the land, residential land, is, has a subdivision bylaws?
Right.
Because it sounds like this one would only be applicable to the ones that do not have subdivision bylaws, right?
Yes, ma'am. If there's CCRs or those are civil, those are not regulated by the city, and so they would need to either modify their bylaws or work within their HOAs to see whether they would like to add allowance for these types of possibilities. The other idea is you could write them into base zoning districts and add them into the PDs that are already existing, making an allowable adoption within those PDs as well. And so you can just add them as optional base zoning districts. That's a way of doing it. You could do them as overlays. There's a wide spectrum of tools that you could put in place, just again, providing the opportunity for this to take place.
So are you talking about redevelopment of the commercial areas that are not used right now, or are you talking about redevelopment of current subdivisions?
Well, I don't believe that you're going to have market forces for redevelopment of subdivisions, but there may be some lots that were corner lots that were reserved for daycares or for other uses that may have opportunity for transitional housing that would allow for dense housing that may not match within their current minimum standards.
Herein lies where I think the public needs to be involved in that discussion, especially an HOA or something, if they're going to invite multifamily in a single-family residential community.
These could be for, it doesn't have to be multifamily.
Is that what you're saying, though? Instead of having it redeveloped as a single-family unit, that you can have a multifamily unit inside a single-family subdivision?
That's not what we're proposing. This would be mapped in different areas,
Okay.
but
I don't know
that's probably decades away before anything like that was even a viable option.
So is the intent for this then to replace what we were doing with the zoning districts, like looking at a specific area in the land use plan, like Lake Point? So is this to try to go away from now what we were doing there and then making this a broader definition that we just use across Sugar Land?
Yeah, good evening, Commission. So as you recall, through some of the land use plan work, there were activities, various different activity centers,
Right.
regional neighborhood activity centers. So some of this could apply to that. We've also, there's recommendations in the land use plan that relate to medium density single family. We just don't have good zoning districts that exist already that could accommodate or incorporate those types of uses into our districts and into the city. So these, while they're called, urban center or neighborhood zones, transition zones, those are some of the kind of policy that's already been kind of discussed and established through the land use plan. But from a standpoint of like Lake Point redevelopment, that was very targeted and specific to that development site. But we had done work previously on like a mixed use code, so some of these could be examples of that, but just more tailored to different kinds of applications.
Yeah, but these would be generic, more or less, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Instead of Lake Point is specific to that site, whereas these could be more applicable across the city. Yeah. Or to the neighborhood or regional activity centers that aren't specified.
But then it
with the
sort of
Lake
goes
Point
away from what we had talked about in these areas that we have remaining, is that we wanted the opportunity to define what goes there as making it something different for Sugar Land. Maybe not necessarily in the neighborhood areas, but like if you look at Imperial, so if we just did an overlay of this for Imperial, then that would allow for, you know, just something generic to happen, where the city, I think, would be trying to drive something very unique in that area. And I thought in some of the other areas in the land use plan we were going to too. We sort of went away from that in Lake Point because a developer came in and said, hey, can't do that. So we sort of missed that opportunity to activate some natural resources that we have in Sugar Land. And we don't have very many of those opportunities left.
Right, right. Yeah. So I think it's similar in the fact that right now our only vehicle is the PD. And so that would be what we would be using for Imperial, for example. Obviously with Lake Point, we went kind of a different direction. We started with the mixed use code, but then we kind of said we need to do something very targeted, and we turned it into the Lake Point redevelopment zoning district. Some of these would be they would be part of kind of our standard districts that could be applied in where it makes sense, where there's areas where it's the neighborhood activity centers or regional activity centers, or some of the medium density single family areas, medium density mixed use areas that are also contemplated and outlined in the land use plan.
Yeah, so it would be generic development, sort of like the codes that we have now in the
They would be
development
standards.
code.
Yeah, they would be standards. So if you want to do certain types of things, you would be these are the set of standards that you would follow.
So you would be relying on whatever developer would come in for that design and what that design would look like. And there would be nothing then that would direct that developer. As long as he would go by the codes, they could do what they want.
Just like they would do for any of our commercial or standard single family or anything like that. It would be a standardized set of standards. Yeah.
But the single family still has to come before us and has to be platted, and they have to do. I mean, there's no standalone single. So I think I know where you're going. There's no oversight now.
Right.
They could take whatever when the target disappears. Now, and they can do whatever they want as long as it meets these criteria, and then it just becomes an automatic.
From a layout standpoint, but there could still be other things like platting and those building permits and those types of things that have to be.
Right, but even then, that's still very objective. They have to meet those platting standards no matter what,
correct.
right? So, but the input from a community standpoint is it goes right from the developer to staff. It doesn't come here.
Because the standards are already established.
Yeah.
They've gone through the commission, they've gone through the city council. In a kind of ideal situation. They've already been kind of vetted and established.
Yeah. But then what, if this goes forward, then the council has to understand that then they're not really in control of trying to define what land we have left or what we redevelop, and making it something unique for Sugar Land. I mean, it's what they're going to rely on, what the developer comes or what the developer vision is for that area.
I would say that I would disagree, because I would say that they have had a role in outlining what are the standards that we want our land to develop under.
But I think the standards don't define that you want, well, I don't want to get into it because I think we missed that opportunity with Lake Point.
Yeah, you're looking at trying to find out and determine every standard right now for every situation, whereas when you go through the PD process, it's a workshop, you can discuss it, and there's feedback on both sides. Is there a way, I'll throw this out, if you want to see if it sticks, is there a way to do what you're trying to do, but streamline the PD process so that there's still some oversight by instead of, all right, 1 + 1 = 2, I get my permit, I'm out. So
yeah, it's a great question. And PDs are negotiated zoning, and zoning is discretionary, unlike subdivision. Subdivision, if it meets your minimum standards, you're obligated to approve. Zoning is a discretionary act in the state of Texas, and so the intent with these districts is we would work with you all in the development community and the community to write these standards exactly emulating what Sugar Land would want. And so instead of your conventional standards, these would be more form-based. You would have different building types that would be allowed in each area. And the building types would have very clear standards of what that building would look like. So it'd get much more refined, and you know what you're going to get in the end results, because there are architectural elements. You can regulate front porches or different characteristics that the community feels important. So these would be right-sizing your ordinances with local preferences. We build these ordinances off of what we would want. We would model these out with you. We'd select some sites to actually draw out. And so it would be through that process, but on the front end. And so instead of doing it every time a developer comes in, negotiating the zoning, this back and forth, which from my understanding during the listening sessions was one of the most challenging things we were hearing from the redevelopment group, from the business owners, the developers. They didn't feel like there was predictability or consistency, both from, and so we think that this would be a really good way of doing this. And again, they would have to apply for this. So you still would have that bite at the apple. You would still have the public consultation because they would be applying for this zoning district to apply to a particular site, which at the time you all would get to deem whether it's an appropriate land use building type or not for those areas based off of the existing context of the neighborhoods, those types of things. And we would write these standards where they would be applicable. And so we looked through your land use classifications and we tried to map these where they may fit most appropriately based off of y'all's existing patterns. And so that's kind of how they were written. But the hope would be that you workshop these now, get all of our real detailed elements into the standards, and so the refinement of this zoning district is very clear, it's predictable, and so it's flexible and predictable all at the same time. It would allow ranges, it would allow different building types. If they came back and wanted to change the building type, that would be a rezoning request. And so they would kind of have to commit to their development plan at the time that they're doing this. Any modifications would actually trigger, again, a rezoning. They'd have to come back, even if they were coming back for urban district, they would have to tell us what they were doing within those districts. So that one is the most intense district. The next one, and this is what it looks like, and this is like some examples, and what you see next to it is a series of tables, and it shows you what building types would be allowed, what type of public frontage types, and so, for example, a common yard and a fence isn't necessarily appropriate in an urban context. It's like we're in a tuxedo to a two-step. Be out of place, right? Oh, I thought that was going to land well. Sorry. So, you've got shop fronts, you've got terraces, porches, and those types of things. And then it's also regulated by street type. And so the goal is to align your infrastructure to your development patterns so that you're actually creating financial sense. For example, you don't want an urban street in a rural environment. The development along that is not going to pay for it, right? The upside down investment from the city's perspective. It's the city's wheelhouse, and being good stewards of the tax dollars is really critical. And when you can align your zoning and your infrastructure tools to emulate those patterns, you can actually generate a lot of wealth and not have gaps in financial situations. The next one we came up with was the neighborhood district. And this is the one where cottage courts, this is a pocket neighborhoods. They're a really popular type. They used to be called LA bungalow courts. People don't like that because they're from California, so they changed it to a pocket neighborhood. It's where a series of small homes front a central green, and they're rear loaded, so the vehicular traffic will pull off the end. They generally will have like a community house or those types of things, but it allows someone with a little bit of money to buy a house and be a part of the community and live their full life cycle of their life in Sugar Land. So that's one way to do it. It allows for townhomes or row houses. And again, maybe those are not appropriate in certain areas. And so we could geographically refine these, saying these housing types are allowed in these districts and these areas, not in these. So again, right sizing and creating local preferences with these is how these would be calibrated. We're just giving you some snapshots of how they have generally worked in other municipalities. And here's an example of a pocket neighborhood. There are 12 layers of landscaping before you hit the front porch. And then it fronts a central green on that, just so that you can kind of emulate that it's not stacking a bunch of houses side by side. These two have stoops that are pretty similar, but there are about 15 houses of this style wrapped into a courtyard, just another housing type that we see. And there's some of the standards that may be appropriate: detached houses, attached houses. We don't really use the word single family. Family is a federal, challenged statement. So we have attached buildings, detached buildings, cottage courts, those types of things. And again, we could calibrate with you all what building types you all feel would be appropriate or inappropriate, and where these get applied, where the parking goes. But again, 90% of your development standards are wrapped right into this, very easy to use graphic type of element.
So in something like that, how do you, what you said, you wanted somebody to be able to afford to purchase their own home. So how do you set it up, the standard, so that a developer doesn't come in and put 100 of these in and make them rentals?
I mean, fair housing laws will supersede. I don't know that you can preclude that. Yeah, I mean,
How do you stop them from being Section 8 housing?
that's the financing tool. I mean, the housing choice and the way that you design it is by the standards that you put in place. And so you can make it, really stringent standards where the cost to build is higher. That's going to generate the upside down where it's not rentable, I guess. I mean, I don't know that you can limit those. We haven't seen that happen yet. I know that that's happening in this area, though. I've heard that that's a common problem happening here, where people are building build to rents. But I don't know that there's a solution. I've heard that the state legislature's potentially looking into this as well. I think fair housing is going to get involved in it. I don't know the solution to that.
Having strict subdivision rules eliminates that problem.
I don't know if you can deem them to not be rentable.
Well, I don't mean in that
Okay.
respect.
Next would be the transition zone. It's between your commercial corridors and your residential. There's a lot of large land areas that exist that this could be applied. And again, it would need to be calibrated based off of where it's appropriate, where it fits best. But we really feel like it's an opportunity to have some small scale commercial buildings and, accessory dwelling units could be something possible, so that someone can rent their back house out if they wanted to do that. So those types of ideas would be located in the transition zone, and this fits within all of the various land use classifications. It would serve as a step down between your, stringent commercial corridors and your residential areas. We do think there is a lot of land area. Looking at your maps, there are land areas where this would apply, and this district could really create this new housing type to help stabilize the population, provide people that want to downsize their houses and stay in Sugar Land, where they don't want to mow a yard every day, and they want to have an alternative building type, and they wanted to stay in their neighborhood. It could stabilize your neighborhoods, and so we think this is a really great opportunity. Seems to fit in many, but again, it would require calibration. This is an infill neighborhood in northwest Arkansas, in Bentonville, Arkansas, and it's a series of townhomes. But this is kind of the style of development that would fit within that realm. So, and there's a series of standards. Do you want to talk about this? Okay. Thank you all for your time on that. And
Thank you.
We'll continue this. Yes.
So some other items that we looked at and the diagnostic included signs, landscaping, nonconformity, which was touched upon a little bit, and stormwater. With the signs, it was maybe additional graphics, some definitions, sign types, and just generally the organization. Our code is not organized necessarily in a table, and it doesn't recognize maybe any specific zonings or corridors and such. We've had conversations with you all through the last few years about possibly maybe increasing the height of signage based upon the road classification and that speed limit, right? So there's a little bit better visibility. So those are some of the things that we're talking about. With landscaping, I love landscaping. With this, I've learned so much from it. Whenever we got the analysis, it's just not all landscaping or not all trees are equal. So different types of trees and species on a caliper is different from a different species. And how we look at some of that with protected trees. Right now with our protected trees, we look at it across the board with a certain caliper, and it's a hardwood. But maybe a live oak is a better tree than a water oak of that same caliper in regards to protection. So that was very eye-opening for me, and I enjoyed that. Our plant list, right now our plant list is, it's in the regulations, and it's codified. It doesn't leave much room for variability with similar products. We oftentimes are working with developers, and they'll get their site plans approved with that landscaping plan in it. And then on the back end, end, when they're actually doing the work, they'll come back through for revision because they may not be able to get a certain type of plant that's listed on that site plan. It's still in the approved list, but we kind of have to go through that revision instead of just saying, yeah, this is equal, you can do that in the same. So providing some flexibility if it's maybe not codified, but we have a list that we're constantly working and revising, with the arborist, with the landscape architect, and then also taking into things are changing, with our climate. We may not get as much rain, so maybe it's not good to have, X like species, and it gives us a little bit more flexibility. Nonconformity, this is not really something that you guys ever get to see, but it's something that we deal with on the administrative level with staff. We don't define what a non-conforming site is. Over the years, we've had a really great standard and interpretation of how we do that if something needs to come into compliance. And then also just providing some clarity when we're talking about non-conforming lots, non-conforming structures, non-conforming uses. We never define what substantial compliance is. A lot of ordinances that I've worked with in the past will talk about that, and it's a monetary value. And if you go over that monetary value, well, now it's a substantial change to the use. We don't do that. I don't know what that happy middle is, but I think we can find that with changing some updates to the nonconformity section. And then stormwater. This is, again, not something that you guys really get into a whole lot. But we do have like standards that we have for LID, the low impact development. It's not typically an option that's used, but we feel like maybe like promoting those standards and that we allow it would maybe, put some things up front and give people options that if they wanted to have that kind of going hand in hand with the landscaping and where we are. Yes, sir.
Has anybody done, I was reading through the LID recommendations, and we're all for infiltration. Unfortunately, we sit on a bunch of clay.
We sure do.
So I guess, is it even feasible for us to, with the amount of rainfall we get, is it even feasible for us to try to consider a huge amount? I know detention or stormwater was a big cost, but flooding is a big risk. Mm-hmm. Do we have anything that works in the city that we've seen?
So we have some standards already in place.
No, I know we have the standards, but has anybody implemented them so that we have an idea of what it looks like in practice in Sugar Land?
To my knowledge, I don't know of a development that has done low impact development, but we can come back and give you some of that information or just like follow up, and I can speak with engineering if we have anything. But you're right, the clay soil that we have, it is more costly to do it here, but we would like to give that opportunity to the developer that if they want to, do it, that is just something, and maybe like promoting it a little bit more. Right now, it's an option to do it.
So it must not be cost effective because they're not really doing it.
There are some sites in Houston. I know we don't like talking about Houston sometimes, but there are some sites in Houston, in Midtown, that they did a lot of low impact development, both on the commercial side and then also I think it was in some multifamily. And you probably never really noticed, like walking down the street, I think it's on maybe Bagby, but there are like swales and like sidewalks, and that's low impact development at work.
And do we have in our low impact code the natural channel with growth in it? Is that one of the things that we allow in our low impact development? Do you know?
I don't know offhand.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Sorry about
because
that.
That was one of the things I was worried about for a mosquito breeding ground. It silts up. It doesn't provide a lot of conveyance, and who's going to clean it? And you can't clean it because then you kill all the vegetation. I'm just curious to see if we had any of those here to see if that worked.
As far as standards, I'd have to look into that if we had anything like that. I'd like to think that we have a really good engineering team and that they've probably thought of that before they put it in the standards. But
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So next steps tonight, the next steps that we're going to do based off of the feedback and information that we've gotten from you, we're going to work on drafting some regulations for the development code for parking. We'd anticipate bringing something to you to workshop mid to late summer this year, and then followed up in late summer, obviously after the workshop, with a public hearing and a consideration and action that we could bring forward to council for approval. If you have any questions, any additional questions? Yes, sir.
I just want to tell you, I'm excited by this. I know there's a lot of people that, you worry about parking, you worry about facilitating the needs of our existing residents in the city of Sugar Land. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I grew up 3 kids that don't want to live anywhere near here. And I spent the day today with someone that told me the same story. Somewhere in the middle lies the answer here. And we're looking at a point in time that we can change the trajectory of Sugar Land with the right moves. So thank you for coming forward with this. I appreciate it. I don't know if the answer is no parking, or if it's regulated, or if it's middle housing, or it's somewhere in here lies the truth. And I just think we all have to be very open-minded as we carry this forward to council, that we got to start thinking differently, because if not, Highway 6 between 59 and Dulles is going to look like Highway 6 between 59 and Dulles in 20 years. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do y'all have any other questions or clarifications? With that said, though,
Oh, were you guys going to go?
There was a study that was shared with us a while back where an outside consultant was hired to see the tax dollar generation.
Urban 3?
Yeah.
Yes.
And in that study, the conclusion was that, I think it was Chick-fil-A or something, that was generating the most revenue from their one location. I mean, there were these spikes that they had done. All the purple lines were in those neighborhood activity centers. But now this is a shift where you're saying, because the districts that you're proposing to create, which somebody would have to apply for, can only be applied to these neighborhood centers and activity centers, because that's the only land that's available for redevelopment. There's less than 4% land available for development, right? So everything else is a subdivision residential land. So if you were to take away, and this is just, I'm just asking, if you were to convert these commercial neighborhood activity centers to mid-housing, so people from their large single-family homes can move into this mid-housing, then you're actually changing the trajectory of your tax dollars, right?
I feel like that is a few different ways to answer that.
I mean, what I'm hearing now is in total contrast to what that study said.
So that study, there was not a conclusion. The purpose of it is that there is value to your land and you have a finite amount of land. It was not saying we should turn all of our parks into revenue generating and develop everything, right? Like, our parks are part of what make our quality of life as well. The purpose of that was to really understand that when we're making a land use decision, we're making a financial decision for the city. Again, does not mean that we should make sure that we're making as much money as possible on every piece of land that we have, because we need to have our parks, we need to have our schools, we need to have our hospitals. So that's why I don't want that study to be taken out of context of saying like there was a conclusion and a direction from it. It was an exercise to understand that when we make a land use decision, we're making a financial decision, and how we should look at each acre of our land and make the best decision based off of the information that we have in that situation. It did include property tax and sales tax, and yes, having large parking lots does not create a greater sales tax amount that is going to make that overall acreage to have a higher value per acre. A Walmart is going to have a tremendous amount of sales tax, but it is on such a large piece of land that it is not a overall large value per acre generator.
Yeah, understood.
Well, but if you convert it to residential, there's no sales tax except for what they spend there's a balance somewhere.
Correct.
With how
Correct.
much commercial and how much residential. And I think we're over commercial right now, obviously, it looks like, right? Because we have a lot of empty space. But there's a balance. We can't redevelop everything residential. Then we take, because are we not mostly sales tax driven?
It's not a yeah, there is a balance and a mix, and there's not a specific formula that it needs to be. It's every city is going to be unique, and it's looking at every project and every situation on the overall whole. We have some areas of retail that are very vacant, and we have other areas that are completely full. Overall, the city's overall retail vacancy rate sits at below 5%. The last time I checked which is actually tight. So we might have some concentrated vacancies in some very specific buildings or areas, but on the whole of the city, our vacancy rate for retail is very low.
So then what are we redeveloping? If we have only 5%? I'm not being, this is not combative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really just digging. Are we going to redevelop these areas that are supporting a sales tax base already, that with 95% have successful businesses?
Redevelopment, as it talks about in the land use plan, is going to be market driven. And so some of the challenges of redevelopment is that you have an area that is very high value in terms of its land, and it's going to be very costly in order to redevelop it. So for certain situations, it's a matter of, are we going to offer an incentive to fill that gap to make the redevelopment a reality, or are we going to have to wait and for the market to allow that it's going to financially make sense for it to do it on its own in the private market? What we're talking about here is setting up our regulations so that not for this specific project or a project a year from now, but that we are setting an environment up that is going to allow for redevelopment to take place without adding additional barriers or layers to that process.
So you want something that when the market controls and says, I want to redevelop this Walmart.
Correct.
And I know we always use that term, whatever.
Correct. It's laying the groundwork.
Yeah, you're laying the groundwork for that redevelopment, given the flexibility to see what the market says would be best there, even though that it might not be the best for the city. We don't know that.
Well, I think the depends on who you ask. I mean, we're talking about a kind of a imaginary project right now, right? But as we have a land use plan that talks about what is the best way for our community to evolve over the long term, what are our best opportunities for reimagining growth, and that's where it lays out there are certain areas that maybe are the best candidates for that, but we have not made the regulation changes that would have gone along with it to match that policy direction.
And if I can, this is just laying down some of the tools and the groundwork for the future, right? It may be great if something, comes in soon, if something was adopted, but this could be something that is, 10, 15 years in the future, and we're working on it right now to set it up, because while I know that we realize that, not everything we have is that old, at some point it will be. We're probably not going to be around to see it, but it's going to be, and if we set it up for success and lay down that groundwork, we'll never get into that cycle where things aren't going to be so pretty. I've worked in communities where things are not so pretty, and you have to have these wholesale changes and laying down the groundwork to promote nicer businesses that aren't seedy, coming in. I've seen it all, I think, basically. But I think that's really what I wanted to reiterate. And right now, what we've brought forth to you in the workshop is that direction. Is this a good path for us to go forward? Specifically with the zoning, it's going to have to go through a process, like, Matt said, that, we're going to be able to like flesh out those things, get those things down, and then council still has to approve it. But then the neat thing is at some point, someone's going to need that rezoning or need that zoning. This is going to come back before this body so we can look at those things of, is it appropriate, if we're looking at residential or commercial? That's where we get those opportunities to look at it. So this isn't just you're never going to see or hear from us again. And odds are, we might not get it right because we're human, the first time, 100%. And we come back for amendments as we tweak it. Heck, we've done that with the Lake Point redevelopment code as we've worked through it, so we have a really great community out there. So.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Please. No, I was just saying, just in my opinion, I still like the idea of this combined with the PD so that it streamlined some way, but that still gives the city that flexibility to have input instead of just I've got a 2x6 Lego and you're allowed to use it wherever you want, and it just becomes all these Legos that all look the same. It just seems that there's a lot of flexibility in the PD if we can streamline the process to be not so cumbersome for the developer.
Oh. My question's sort of along those lines, but I can understand why, we need to simplify and make it easier for people to do business in Sugarland and easier for you all to manage. But we've talked about really how you set up and you want to, say, hey, this is going to be, whatever kind of housing. But how does that connect with trying to plan what an overall area, like with the land that we do have left right now to redevelop, of what kind of commercial kinds of things we want to come in to that area to make people like want to live in that area, for instance? How does that link, that commercial piece? Because that's not really... that would still come in as a part of the zoning, but what drives that? We've been talking all about housing, but what comes into that overall? Because we talked about that, like, I don't know, what was it, 2 years ago, around how you get that strategic view of what you want that area to be, in that sort of a high level, that you want it maybe to activate it into an area. This is, sort of like what now we have with the brewery, that. Now, I know that was somebody that came in, had a vision, and took that up, but that has really been an attraction. But how do you get that coupled with the other areas that we have left to try to get developers or get people to come in and do that? Because that's really what's going to bring people into Sugarland, not just the housing.
One of the ways to do it is doing area plans. And you really do myopic plans for those areas, and you lay them out, and you work with the landowners, and they can target certain industries and work with the community. We call them small area plans, and you write the standards, and you put the tools in place, those zoning standards, and you entitle the land exactly what you want, and you do the area plan laying out all of those particulars, and you draw the plan. Those are really useful. We've done a lot of area plans that have come directly to life as we laid them out.
But we've had that instance happen where we might have a plan like that or a vision, and where, developers saying, hey, it's just not economically feasible to do anything with the commercial. I can come and build the townhouses and the houses, but, I can't do anything commercial in this space because it's just not feasible right now.
Right. No, that's a reality, and kind of I think why the market does play a role in this, and have to be aware and cognizant of that. But I think kind of on the zoning side, the small area plans or area plans are helpful for setting kind of that broad vision for the feel or kind of character of an area. Likewise, with your zoning regulations and your standards, I think that's where focusing on the form, which helps kind of drive that, again, that look, that feel for a particular area, is also part of the equation.
Because I'm just thinking, if we don't have the right vision, and because I know there's been talks about it, it could be 20 years down the road, but to activate, I think a key resource that Sugarland has is the waterways that we have. But we don't really have anything in place right now that can activate that for, being something that would bring people into Sugar Land. But that, if we plan around that, then you don't have a hiccup that says, oh, well, now it's gonna be, $100 million to do this, because, we didn't really think about that.
Right, yeah. No, and I think it's been talked about in kind of key areas and strategic
Yeah.
areas, but yes, like a holistic plan, we don't
Yeah.
necessarily have a plan for that
Yeah.
at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else?
Any other comments, questions from the commissioners? Pardon me. Oh, thank you very much,
Thank you.
staff, and thank you, I'm sorry, what was your Simple City? Appreciate you coming out. I hope we weren't too hard on you. All right, with that, we'll move on to Section 6, reports. Liaison report. You had the report?
There was no planning to
No.
be discussion at the 19th meeting.
Nothing to report. Okay. City staff report.
All right, so your next meeting is June 11th. This is going to be we're going to have a couple of items. We're going to have a public hearing and consideration action on a standard zoning case. Haven't done one of those in a while, so that'll be pretty straightforward. And then we also have the annual CIP review and recommendation. So this is the annual process where we come and present new and updated projects on the city's proposed on the city's CIP. I keep saying CPI. So one thing about the June 11th meeting, this will be also on a day where it's the first World Cup FIFA games will be being played. There will be a watch party out in Town Square for the game. That'll be happening earlier that day. So we're actually going to start our meeting at 6:30. I'll be putting this all in a communication to you, but just to give you a heads up now, so we'll be starting the meeting just 30 minutes delayed. But we will press on and have the meeting, and look forward to having you all here.
Just for staff's notification, I won't be not
Correct.
there. Yeah.
Noted.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes. Unanimous. Adjourned.